hiroga cheche chanye bo churu. Toche alame yumye bamar shubo kejige hiroga cheche chanye bo churu. Kejige hiroga cheche chanye bo. Kejige hiroga cheche chanye bo. So, why you want to become a Buddha? The answer what I wanted you to give me is because of my compassion. Not only a compassion, but a greater compassion. All these living beings are, one or the another is connected with me. I cannot leave a single being out saying I have nothing to do with this person. That's funny. I call students a friend, and rather than students, that's my personal style. And everybody's friend. Number one, if there is no karmic connection between the two persons, the teacher and the student, it's not going to work. It doesn't help. And that's the number one choice made by karma, a karmic connection of both student as well as the teacher.
There are many teachers, but I was fortunate to have met two very remarkable teachers. Gyalpa Rinpoche was the second one, but his friend was the first one. But that's, you should know that it's not unusual. In Tibet, it was not unusual to have two teachers. Maybe, in fact, Gyalpa Rinpoche told me once, you said you had studied with 40, 30?
Yeah, 39, 40.
Yeah. So it's not unusual to have that. But to have a very, there may be one or two who be most important. And I've been to hear many people speak, but I would say that these two are the ones that are most important for me. The teachers who were actually born and trained in Tibet, this is the last generation. And if we are fortunate enough to meet a teacher with that background and training, it's a unique opportunity. The next generation of the people younger than us, let's say the people that, like my children, I have a little boy, he won't be able to study with someone like that. They won't be there. You have to remember, people who grew up in Tibet were in a culture that was totally Buddhist. I don't think you went to the movies in Tibet.
Well, I did go. I did
you
see
did?
the movies, yes.
See, that's what I mean, he's a funny guy.
That's funny.
But,
and about this transmission thing, I like to say something. The true transmission is the true development within the individual. But then, you know, on the other hand, there's also like initiations. So when you did complete the ritual, that is one type of transmission. And then there's oral transmission, which is when you heard the sound. That is the oral transmission.
The mechanism of transmission or transference comes from person to person. That's true also in music. It must be true. I think it probably is true in dance. It's probably true in poetry. It's a direct transmission from person to person. In order for that mechanism to happen, you have to cultivate that relationship. They talk about medicine, the doctor, and the nurse. The nurse is the Sangha. The doctor is the teacher, and the medicine is the Dharma. But these are all things that you learn after a while. But one of the difficult things to understand for us, because it's not part of our culture, and it becomes more difficult, but the idea that transmission happens person to person. In my case, because it happened in music long before I met any teachers, I understood it right. I understood that. I understood it because it happened in my life in that way. So I was able to clearly see it. So when I finally met at the age of 30, I had had 22 years of guru relationship, but in music.
Political, economic, and I probably have more now.
I'm sure.
Yeah,
And she says that the very worst ones are in Africa.
yeah,
Because there's so many. We don't hear very much about that one.
yeah.
The house I grew up in, we had that. Yeah, they were Jewish mostly, with numbers. The numbers were on their wrist. Mostly they were older ones that I met. I was very young. I was about 8 or 9 years old. They were scary.
When I had to leave Tibet, I was not hanging on my old position or property or wealth. Number one, you're forced to go, so there's a strong force which cut everything because you've been kicked out. And you've been not only kicked out, you've been kicked out by hundreds of miles, thousands of miles away. So that's number one, forcefully cutting. And number two, of course, it is the Buddhism that helps tremendously, because here it tells you all the time, it is impermanent, it is here now, it will disappear next. And it is not here now, it will appear again. So I've been taught that since childhood, read, and I've been repeated. So when it actually happened, you have to realize and let it go. Every fear for me is not necessarily bad. Now, for example, if you're afraid of suffering in the lordoms, and then that is the cause of taking refuge. If you fear the samsara suffering, that is the cause of seeking liberation. And if you fear my friends and the families and all other, what we call it, mother sentient beings are going to suffer in samsara in general, and particularly lordom sufferings, that is cause of developing body, mind, love, compassion. So there is a good part in the fear, and a normal Western understanding saying every fear is bad. It's not true. There are some, maybe it's bad, but you can make use of it. Very helpful.
The actual communication comes through the teacher. The living teacher is considered more important than the Buddha, because you can't meet the Buddha, but you can meet the teacher. So the transmission is not going to happen through Sakyamuni. He's been gone for 2,500 years. We have the words. Through his words, we have the Dharma. The Sangha is also incredibly important, because it's the power of the Sangha, the power of the community. How can I say it? It makes much more intense the practice.
there's no alarm or something, right? When the smoke comes, sometimes the alarm goes. I think fears are overcome when you gain wisdom. The ego-fear combination. Ego, for me, is a false me, false I, and which sort of dressed in the fear, and you carries the hatred and the obsession in the right and left hands, and they fights. That's ego to me. So fear and the ego are almost coming together, which is we get confused. The confusion is not knowing.
We were leaving now. We would be there in 1 hour.
How far is she from the church?
How far are you from the church? Maximum 5 people.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And vegetarian, they're all vegetarian.
Yeah, we're all vegetarian. That makes it easier.
When I first came to that St. John's Church,
Yeah.
and you were playing that night, and
In New York City.
New York City, and then I asked you whether you can come and help me to set up Jewel Heart,
Yeah.
and then you were very kind to accept the invitation. Then we had Alan joined you,
Yeah, that was a big help.
and that was great help, and they both came to Ann Arbor. And since then, Philip has been doing every year concert for Jewel Heart to raise a fund. And because of Philip and because of Alan and a number of other artists are also very much involved.
Clementi.
Francesco Clementi of the Italian, Patti Smith.
Yes, has also been very helpful.
Patti Smith is very, and Laurie Anderson came.
And Paul Simon.
Paul Simon.
Cosmopolitan readings stand up against governments, against God. Stay irresponsible. Say only what we know and imagine. Absolutes are coercion. Change is absolute. Ordinary mind includes eternal perceptions. Observe what's vivid. Notice what you notice. Catch yourself thinking. Vividness is self-selecting. If we don't show anyone, we're free to write anything. Remember the future. Advise only myself.
Artists are very motivated very often to communicate with other people. And many people who do music or painting or writing, they want to be helpful, to make the world better in some way. You want to leave the world better than you found it, if you could do that. If you leave it worse, then that's not good at all. If you're neutral, it's also not very good. In a way, you can say if you didn't do anything, well, then you didn't make any use at all of your life.
Good to see you. Thank you. Okay, we have to go. Hey. Good. Let's go. Let's go, Russian. Let's go, Russian. I hope so too. Or is it you want the piano on top here? That's fine. No good.
I'm glad you made it.
Very nice. Thank you. Yeah, Philip.
Concert hall, you're not allowed to touch the piano.
He's the publisher. Yeah, but I think Philip wants to try a little bit. And
when I'm doing music, I do music. In a funny way, you can say, oh, it's mixed up. In a way, it is. But when I'm doing music, I'm not thinking of anything else. Maybe it'd be better if it wasn't like that, but that's how it developed for me. And what I can do is use the music like tonight to make an introduction. So the music becomes very useful. This church was built 900 years ago, which was about the same time that Atisha and Mila Raper were teaching in Tibet, which became the foundation of what Gelek Rinpoche teaches. So it's a wonderful coincidence. I'm not going to say very much about his life, except that he was born and educated in Tibet and came to the West in the 1980s. He started the Jewel Heart in the early 1980s in Nijmegen and started another group in the United States in the late 1980s. I'm going to play the piece that I wrote for the Dalai Lama's first public address in New York in 1979. And the piece has become identified in my mind with this kind of event. So that's what I'm going to begin with. We call the piece Mad Rush. I was once talking to my other teacher, Geshe Rinpoche. I call him Geshe Rinpoche. I asked him once, I said, I understand there are 3,000 realms of existence. Is one of the existence made up of music? And he said, definitely. He said, definitely. And he said, I said, is it possible to be reborn in that realm? And he looked at me and he said, absolutely, you have. He said, hopefully. That's not the same as definitely. It's hopefully.
I'd like to thank you, Philip, that not only your introduction and beautiful music, and especially making very special trip this time, all the way from New York to here this morning, and going back, well, probably tonight or tomorrow early morning. Thank you. And somebody asked me this afternoon, how long it took for you to write this book? And I said 60 years. And that's what it is, because of 60 years of my studying in the Tibetan Buddhism. I'm now trying to make a simple, straightforward, easy way. Even a high school kids can read and understand. If you look in the English title, it says, Good Life, Good Death. The good life to me, life that is meaningful and worthwhile, worth for yourself and people who are associated with you, like your own spouses, children, parents, including mother-in-law. So that's a good life.
He's talking to a public who may not know anything about Buddhism. So talk in a way that welcomes people to the ideas, but there may not be very much detail in the talk. But it works extremely well for this kind of place. But he also has detailed knowledge of the practices, and a lot of that has been recorded. People who have spent time with him, you'll go over the recordings again, and sometimes they've been made into books. There's a lot of work to be done with the material that he has left. This group in Holland has been very good at that. Many of the lecture series have been turned into books which are circulated within the community that he works with.
That is such a funny thing. People don't want to talk about it. People would like to hide. Yet everybody want to know. It's almost like, they close one eyes and tell me quickly, That is basically our attitude. Allen Ginsberg called me. So I said, "Hey, Allen, how are you?" He said, "Well, to tell you the truth," he said, "normally if it was me before, if somebody tells me you're going to die, I'm going to hit the ceiling, no doubt about it." He said, "Today, in my own surprise," he said, "when the doctors came up after test, they all have very gloomy face. So I told them, cancer, and they shook hands. And I told them they're still not smiling. So I told them, incurable, and they shook their heads again. And then they are not saying anything. So I said, soon. So they said 3 to 4 months. So he said, well, I was sort of relieved, he said. I was relieved to know. I was not angry. So I'm preparing, and I prepared my life, and thanks to you and Tungpa Rinpoche. I was there when he had a stroke. He was unconscious, and I went the next day. I reached there till about quite afternoon, around about 4:30 or 5, and his room was completely filled up by those great poets, musicians, and painters, and movie actors. There's all kinds of drinks and Chinese food and sandwiches and everything on the table. And when I walked to Alan's place, Philip was there since the morning, sitting there doing his own projects there. So then I came in, and I hold Alan's hand, talked to him a few minutes, but he's unconscious. But it reminded him. And then I started my own self-initiations of a Hiroka or Chakasambara. And about 2 he died. He finally left. And then I continued as long as his consciousness was in his body. So till next 2 days. So we continued doing some projects. So he died extremely peacefully.
His Holiness the Dalai Lama once said, he was talking about the signs of death and the death experiences, and you probably know this, their practices in what is called preparing for the Bardo state, that's the stage in between. And there are definite specific practices for that you prepare for that. And he said once, he said, Well, I've been practicing all my life for that moment. I hope when the moment comes, I don't blow it. You get that? So if he says that, then what can I say?
Good death for me, that a particular ordinary death may be transformed and becoming extraordinary death, of changing the death into a very meditative state, of uplifting the dying individual to an enlightenment level. So that is good death to me. But many people may not be able to achieve that. And this is Buddhist broadcasting, so I'll be happy to say it. So when you don't achieve that, then the second possibility that the Buddha offered to us is the transforming your consciousness to a pure land or something which is normally known as poor. If you are incapable of transforming the death into a, normally in Buddhist terminology, what do we call it, dharmakaya. If you cannot, and then the poor is the second choice. And even you can't get that, then you'll be dying in the thought of a positive, virtuous nature by remembering Buddha or by remembering your guru, by remembering compassion, body, mind, specifically, or wisdom, the emptiness, or faith, and any one of them through which you can make the transaction is also a good death. I was married to a Tibetan woman named Daisila. So she passed away this January. So I was in India about 3 weeks. At the time of her last breath, and I was saying Bhaja Yogini practice, and it's sort of really the word where the Bhaja Yogini may take all sentient beings to her pure land. At that very moment, she breathed last. So it was not attempted, but all that type of thing, a lot of wonderful things happened.